Genesis 50 Bible Study Script, KJV, The Sovereign Plan of God. Today we come to the final chapter of the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 50, verses 1 through 26. This chapter closes one of the greatest narratives in the entire Bible, the story of Joseph and the providence of God. From Genesis chapter 37 until the end of Genesis, the life of Joseph reveals a powerful message. God is always working behind the scenes, even in suffering, betrayal, and hardship. The story that began with Joseph being sold by his brothers now ends with reconciliation, forgiveness, and the fulfillment of God's plan. To understand Genesis chapter 50 properly, we must remember the larger context. Joseph was hated by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused in Egypt, imprisoned and forgotten. Yet through all of those events, God was preparing him to become the ruler of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. God used Joseph to preserve life during a devastating famine. And through Joseph, God preserved the family of Jacob, the family, through whom the Messiah would one day come. Genesis chapter 50 brings the story to its conclusion. Let us begin. 1. The death of Jacob. Genesis chapter 50, verses 1 through 6. After Jacob blessed his sons in Genesis chapter 49, he died. Joseph fell upon his father's face, wept over him, and kissed him. This moment is deeply emotional. Joseph had been separated from his father for more than 20 years. For years, Jacob believed Joseph was dead, but God restored their relationship in the final years of Jacob's life. Now Joseph mourns his father with deep love. Joseph commanded the physicians of Egypt to embalm Jacob. This is historically significant. The Egyptians practiced embalming to preserve bodies, and this process took 40 days. Then the Egyptians mourned Jacob for 70 days. This tells us something remarkable. Jacob, a Hebrew shepherd, was honored in Egypt like a great leader. Why? Because Joseph had become a powerful ruler, and through Joseph, Jacob's family had found favor in Egypt. Joseph then asked Pharaoh for permission to bury his father in the land of Canaan. This fulfilled Jacob's last request. Jacob did not want to remain in Egypt. He wanted to be buried in the cave of Machpelah, the burial place of Abraham and Isaac. This shows the faith of Jacob. Even though he died in Egypt, his heart remained in the land God promised. The patriarchs believed God's covenant promises. They believed that one day, God would bring their descendants back to the promised land. This reminds us of something spiritually important. True believers never see this world as their final home. Like the patriarchs, we are strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Our true home is with God. 2. The funeral journey to Canaan. Genesis chapter 50, verses 7 through 14. Joseph and a great company traveled from Egypt to Canaan. This was no ordinary funeral. The Bible tells us that servants of Pharaoh, elders of Egypt, chariots, horsemen, and Joseph's entire household accompanied him. It was a massive procession. When they arrived at the threshing floor of Atad, they mourned for 7 days. The Canaanites who saw this mourning called the place Abel Mizraim, which means mourning of Egypt. This moment reveals something powerful. The nations saw the sorrow and respect that surrounded Jacob's death. Joseph then buried his father in the cave of Machpelah. This cave had great significance. Abraham purchased this burial place centuries earlier. It became the resting place of the patriarchs: Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, and now Jacob. This burial site represented God's covenant promises. Even in death, the patriarchs were declaring their faith. In the future, God had promised. 3. Joseph forgives his brothers. Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. After Jacob's death, Joseph's brothers became afraid. They feared Joseph might now take revenge. They remembered what they had done to him. They had betrayed him. They sold him into slavery. Now they worried that Joseph had only been kind to them, out of respect for their father. So they sent a message to Joseph. They asked for forgiveness. When Joseph heard this, he wept. Why did he weep? Because Joseph had already forgiven them long ago. Joseph's response is one of the most powerful theological statements in the entire Bible. Joseph said, "You thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good." This statement reveals the doctrine of God's sovereignty. Human beings acted with evil intentions. Joseph's brothers were responsible for their sin, but God was working through those events for a greater purpose. God turned evil into good. God used suffering to save many lives. This is one of the clearest examples in Scripture of God's providence. God is sovereign over history. Nothing is outside his control. Even when people intend evil, God can transform it for his purposes. Joseph then comforted his brothers and promised to provide for them and their families. This is true forgiveness. Joseph did not seek revenge. He chose mercy. Joseph becomes a powerful picture of Christ. Just as Joseph forgave those who betrayed him, Jesus forgives those who crucified him. Joseph suffered injustice but responded with grace. Christ suffered the greatest injustice yet offered salvation. 4. The death of Joseph. Genesis chapter 50, verses 22 through 26. Joseph lived to the age of 110 years. Before his death, he spoke prophetically. Joseph said something remarkable. He told the people of Israel that God would surely visit them and bring them out of Egypt. Joseph believed in God's covenant promises. At this moment, Israel was living comfortably in Egypt. But Joseph knew Egypt would not be their final home, and he made the people swear an oath. When God delivers you, carry my bones with you. Joseph wanted to be buried in the promised land. This moment points forward to the book of Exodus. Hundreds of years later, Moses carried Joseph's bones out of Egypt. Joseph died in faith. Hebrews chapter 11 tells us Joseph believed in God's future deliverance. Even in death, Joseph testified to the promises of God. Genesis ends with Joseph in a coffin in Egypt. The story ends quietly. But the promises of God are not finished. Genesis ends with a coffin. But Exodus begins with deliverance, spiritual meaning and application. Genesis 50 teaches us several profound spiritual truths. First, God is sovereign over history. Even when life seems chaotic, God is working behind the scenes. Joseph's suffering was not meaningless. God used every painful event to accomplish his purposes. Second, forgiveness is a mark of true faith. Joseph had the power to punish his brothers. Instead, he chose mercy. Forgiveness breaks the cycle of hatred and revenge. Third, God's promises extend beyond our lifetime. Joseph died believing that God would one day deliver Israel. Faith means trusting God's promises, even when we do not see their fulfillment immediately. Finally, Genesis prepares us for the rest of the Bible. The story of redemption is only beginning. The family of Israel will grow into a nation. God will deliver them through Moses, and ultimately through the lineage of these patriarchs, the Messiah Jesus Christ will come. The entire Bible reveals one story: God redeeming humanity. Genesis begins with creation. It ends with a coffin in Egypt. But the story of salvation continues, and it leads ultimately to Jesus Christ.
Thank you.